welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Before we begin, can you start by telling us just a little bit about who you are and why you've decided to join the conversation about women in power?
Yeah, my name is Adrian Carli. I am a graduate student at Fresno State in the communication program. And I'm here today because I really like talking about different social issues, especially ones that have to do with women, feminism, gender, stuff like that.
So what does power mean to you?
So power to me has had a few different meanings at different points in my life. I'm a transgender woman, and I've been living as a woman for 3 years. But up until then, I was really socialized to live as a man. And my views on power back then were very, very different than they are now. I know that growing up as a boy and as a teenage boy, I always thought that power was something kind of outside of yourself. I thought that power came from dominance. I thought that they were basically synonymous with each other. To me, at the time, power was about being better than other people, having control over them, letting them know that you're superior in some way. And if you didn't show constantly how powerful you were, then it didn't really exist. It's something that you always had to prove. You always had to prove that you were stronger and better than somebody else. But after living as a woman for a couple years now, my views on power have really shifted. I know that when I think about power now, power kind of comes from within in a way. When I think of power today, I think that power is about making what you want to happen. And oftentimes I feel like that's something that comes from within. Like if you want to reach a goal, you work towards it and you accomplish it. That's power. Power is something that you create, and it comes from within. It has nothing to do with other people, which is completely different than how I used to think about it,
So what do you think, I mean, obviously very different experiences, but what do you feel was your turning point where you sort of started to shift the way that you thought about power to that more of an inward sense of power?
I think I started to feel that way. It was a gradual change after I started transitioning. I think it's because when I first started transitioning, I felt like I was in kind of this awkward place between being a man, both outside and inwardly, to being a woman, both outside and inwardly. So there was a period of time where I didn't, look how I did now. My mannerisms, the way people treated me, they didn't treat me the way women are typically treated. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things I had to learn to do on my own. I know something that I personally always strived for once I started transitioning was to pass for a cisgender or a non-transgender woman, just because that would keep me safer and help me blend in more. And so certain things like learning the kind of clothes that women wear, learning the different nonverbal signals, like the way women sit and talk and gesture, those things are very different than the things that men do. And so kind of building myself into the woman that I wanted to be and seeing people treat me as a woman after I started, becoming who I wanted to be, I think that that's where I realized that power came from within me, because I was creating myself, I think that's when I kind of started to realize that power is something from within.
Mm-hmm. So for you, do you feel more powerful now that you feel that your outward appearance and just kind of outward identity more so matches like your inward identity?
Definitely, yeah. And I think that because while my definition of power as a man was about dominating people, I never felt powerful as a man. I always felt very powerless. And now that I look back on my views on it, I think it's because I just wasn't the person who I was supposed to be. I think that a big part of life is about creating yourself. And I think now that I'm doing that, I'm still in the process of it, but I think that that's where, why I actually do feel pretty powerful now. And I think another part about power that I didn't mention earlier, I also think that power comes with standing up against adversity, mm-hmm. and being able to overcome it. I feel like times where I've felt the most powerful are when I kind of hit a wall and it's a struggle and I want to quit, but then I find a way to solve the problem. And so instead of quitting, being able to overcome whatever it was, that makes me feel powerful too.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us maybe about one or two of those experiences where you have hit a wall and come through it a stronger person?
Yeah, definitely. So I know throughout one big thing for me is my education. So I'm about to start my graduate program this semester, and I was a really bad student all throughout both high school and in college. It took me about 7 years to get my bachelor's degree, going to school off and on, getting lots of Fs. And I always knew that I wanted to get an education and to get degrees after a bachelor's degree. But the cards were kind of stacked against me. And my senior year of college, I decided to, I knew that I didn't want to just settle for just getting I knew I wanted more than just a bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. So I worked really, really hard my senior year. I started the project that's eventually going to be my thesis project in my graduate program. And so while on paper I wasn't the best candidate, I did work really hard to overcome years worth of bad grades and a bad GPA and make myself into an impressive grad school candidate, and it worked because I got in. So that's something that made me feel empowered.
Now, was that post-transition, before?
Yeah, this was all post-transition, yeah.
Do you feel that had any effect on your,
yeah, totally.
on your commitment to?
Yeah, definitely. Prior to transition, I never ever saw any goals through. I would always think, oh wow, I want this to happen. It'd be cool if that happened, but I never took the steps to. And even if I did start to take steps towards accomplishing a goal, like the first sign of adversity, I would quit right away. Mm-hmm. And I remember something that I always said to myself for years and years and years was, oh, well, there's really no, like, if I don't try, then I can't fail. And so then it makes perfect sense, right? Mm-hmm. So technically I didn't fail a lot, I guess, but I also didn't really get the life that I wanted because I didn't have enough self-belief and I didn't really have a drive yet to do those things. And I think the reason I wasn't able to push myself and risk failing, in order to gain success, I think it's because I wasn't comfortable with myself and I wasn't who I was supposed to be yet. But now that I know who I am and I know the life that I want for myself, it's like that gives me motivation, and that's what pushes me. Now that I know who I am, I feel like I have that figured out. So that makes everything else a little bit easier. Mm-hmm.
So you kind of had to manage some of those difficulties, come to that understanding and that kind of self-respect.
Definitely.
To start really investing in that way.
Yeah, I didn't really have any self-respect before that. Like, I don't even think I had a concept of what self-respect was. But now I have self-respect, self-love, self-confidence most days.
So, we've been kind of circling this question, but how has your previous upbringing and experiences as a man influenced how you now live as a woman?
I don't know. That's something I kind of go back and forth on. In some ways, I feel like I have like a really keen insight into the way men think, into the way the world works. But at the same time, I also feel like growing up as a man or as a boy and being socialized to be male kind of gives me a lot of social disadvantages as a woman. There's a lot of things that I've had to learn that other women don't learn when they're like in their 20s, you know? Like I said earlier, I had to learn different nonverbal signals, like the way that men and women sit. That's a huge deal. The way that, like, there's a huge difference between like the postures that a woman has as opposed to the postures that a man has. The things that women talk about, the way they talk to each other, those are things that are so foreign to me. I mean, I'm getting better at them now, but it took a lot of time and reading about like how do women act like women, because the way that women interact with me as a boy is completely different than the way they interact with me now as a woman. And so I've had to change some of my behaviors in order to blend in better. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've been kind of like caught in sort of a hard place because you identify as a woman, you are a woman, but there's that sense that you've almost had to learn how to become what you are.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I first started transitioning, because I take medication that's turned my outward appearance from male to female, and I thought that would be it, you know. I always call them my magic pills, but the outward appearance is just one thing. It's like, I feel like as a trans woman, any there's little things that can give me away. And so I just had to make sure that, yeah, I might look female on the outside, but if I sat with like my, if I was manspreading on the bus or whatever, then that would probably give me away.
So, if you could tell your younger self anything, what would you say?
I would tell him that it's important to be honest with yourself and love yourself. Because I wasn't honest with myself my whole life, and I know I didn't love myself. Even today, I still struggle with saying, I know I love myself, but I know that I could love myself more. And I feel like that's really important for everybody to be able to love themselves. So I think that's what I would tell my younger self. I don't know if he would understand, so maybe I'd have to, I don't know, use my expert communication skills to really make sure he understood. But I think that's what I wish I would have known as a young boy.
So how supportive have people around you been of your transition?
It's kind of a mixed bag, and in some instances, people aren't initially supportive, but they kind of warm up to it. The first person I ever came out to was a girlfriend I had, and she was the first person I told, because the idea that I was trans came out in a therapy session where a therapist I had just started seeing said, "Did you ever think you might be transgender?" I'd never considered it before in my life. Totally blew my mind. And I got really heated, and I shut her down because I was like, no, I'm not. Because I didn't really have a concept of what transgender was at the time. But anyway, afterward, I went to go talk to my then girlfriend about it, and I was like, can you believe what the therapist said? She thinks I'm transgender. And she was like, well, honey, I've always kind of suspected you had some kind of gender identity issues, but anytime I talked about your gender, you would get really upset, which is true. Anytime my masculinity had been questioned, I would get so heated. And, but because like a licensed professional had brought it up, she didn't bring it up well, don't get me wrong. I didn't like the way she just dropped it on me. But because someone who knows about this stuff suggested it, and then someone who was really close to me agreed, it made me start to think. The reason I bring her up is because she was essentially the first person who knew I was trans, my then girlfriend, and she was really supportive the whole time. And I'm glad that I had her support in the beginning. A lot of the things, I'm sure eventually I would have been able to do them on my own, but having her support did help me do a lot of things in the beginning. So she was really supportive. The next people I told were my mom and my brother, and that was really hard and really scary. But I remember that the first thing my mom said was, "You're gonna have such a hard life." But that stuck out to me because around the time I told her, I'd started seeing a new, better therapist, and that therapist told me that if the first thing that a loved one says is an expression of concern for you, then that means that they really care about you. Regardless of if they're on board right away, that shows that they are looking out for you and they care about your well-being. So when my mom said that, I remember what my therapist had said, and I was like, oh, okay, my mom's actually concerned. And that shows that she loves me and does support me. And so from there, I told my dad, which to this day is still the hardest thing I've ever done. So, I'm Mexican, 100%. Both sides of my family are Mexican, and I feel like in our culture, there's kind of this thing about like masculinity, where masculinity is like unquestioned. It's like masculinity is like I guess the idea of machismo, like men are the ones who are in charge, and you can't wane from that, otherwise there's something wrong with you. So going from living as a man to living as a woman, it's like the complete opposite of what machismo is all about. So anyway, when I went to go talk to my dad about it, the first thing he did, he started crying and he said, you can't be. And so that kind of shaped, I don't know, that's kind of been more or less how he's been with me the last 3 years. Like with my mom, it's taken her a long time, but now she does call me she. And she tells people she has a daughter, and we go to makeup stores and stuff. And so it's like she treats me like a woman. It took her a really long time. I had legally changed my name and gender like a year and a half into my transition. And that was really hard for my mom, because even then, the idea that she now legally has a daughter was really difficult for her. but she's really supportive. My brother's really supportive. My dad still, he sees me in dresses. He sees me wearing short shorts. He sees my bra straps through my tank tops. It's like, so obviously I have long hair. There's all these changes. And when he sees me, I could just tell he just looks so sad. And he still calls me he. For him, I know, the hard thing is that I know my dad loves me. But I don't think he really has a willingness to learn what being transgender means or is, because I've tried talking to him about it several times, and I've kind of given up. I hope that one day, maybe one day when I feel stronger, I'll bring it up with him again. But for now, I just deal with that. In terms of other people being supportive, I told some of my friends who I've had for a long time. I actually haven't lost any friends over this, which is really great. And my extended family, like my mom's like sisters and my cousins and stuff, they're all coming around to it too. Like no one ever said outright, "Oh, we don't love you anymore," which is really all that I wanted. It's just taken a long time for members of my family to use the right pronoun, to not freak out when I'm wearing a dress. Not that anyone's had any outbursts, but I can see it in their faces. They're like, "Oh, I'm a little uncomfortable," but it takes getting used to. But in that sense, I would say that I do have the support of my family, which is good. Other than that, I think the only people who I really experience a lack of support with are like strangers on the street. People who call me he still, when I get misgendered, like in person. But even then, I guess strangers don't have to support me. But I don't know. There have been some instances where I tell people that I'm trans or what my pronouns are when I first meet them, and then they still misgender me afterward. And to me, that's just like a lack of respect, which I guess is at the root of support, respect. So I've encountered a lack of respect a few times. But it's just part of the life, It's like the way I see it, I can either continue to get really devastated when things like that happen, or I can just accept that this is just a part of my life, and if someone's going to do that to me, I don't need them in my life, so I just move on and then continue living the best life I can. So that's what I try to do.
And last but certainly not least, what is the one thing you feel that women could do for other women?
So the biggest thing that I think that women can do for other women is be supportive of each other and to encourage each other. This is something that I've been trying really, really hard to do. And even though I think it's the most important thing to do, it's not like I do it all the time. I'm guilty of sometimes like criticizing other women or tearing them down for a couple reasons. One, I'm pretty competitive. Two, I'm also pretty insecure. So it's like with those two facets, I do compare myself to other people, and especially other women. But I think that that's something that we really should try not to do, because I think the world's already kind of designed to put women down. There's so many double standards. Like, a guy can talk about like sex and he's cool. A girl talks about sex and then she's ridiculed for it. Women are paid less. Generally, I think that there's so many things that are against women already that we should not give in and add to all the things that oppress us. I think it's important for us to support each other and be open about encouraging each other and celebrating each other when we do well, instead of tearing a person down. It's easier said than done, and I'm not saying that you have to universally like every person, because that's impossible. But I do think that there are some things, I do think that it's important to celebrate other women when we do well and support each other when we need it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights, and we hope to see you around.
Yeah, I hope so too.